Hi there. Welcome once again to Reading Thucydides Peloponnesian War. I'm Clifford Bates, and we continue in our reading in Book 3, dealing with this session with the sixth summer of the war. We left off with a short, we had that long Friday session where we spent almost 2 hours finishing what was basically the fifth summer of the war, which dealt with a lot of issues that really should have been. I should have maybe broke it up. Again, we're using the Crawley translation in the landmark Thucydides. I have it here, we're using the Google Books access on the screen. Um, Today, we're going to be doing from chapter 89 to 103, which deals with the summer. Um, let's start. During the same summer, different operations. Actually, I have to go ahead. I'm sorry. I need to go over here. This starts out right here. Thing. The next summer. I'm sorry. This is not 89. This is where 89 begins. The next summer, the Peloponnesians and their allies set out to invade Attica under the command of Agis, the son of Archidamus, and went as far as the isthmus, but numerous earthquakes occurring, turned back again without the invasion taking place. In other words, there was like a lot of earthquakes happening in the thing, and the commander was going to the isthmus, which was the Attica, and then seeing the earthquakes happening, he said, "No, I'm not going to go." About the same time as these earthquakes were so common, the Sea of Oribeda in Euboea, retiring from the then line of coast, returned in a huge wave and invaded a great part of the city and retreated, leaving some of it still underwater, so that what was once land is now sea. Such of the inhabitants perishing as could not run up to the higher ground at the time. So, in other words, we had a tsunami. A tsunami hit or Dave Orbea in Ubia. Okay, a similar immunization occurred at Atlantia, uh, Atlantia, the island off the Oputian Laurentian coast, carrying away part of the Athenian fort and wrecking one of two ships which were drawn up on the beach. So therefore, another two different tsunamis, one hitting Euboea, one hitting at this place Upatia, Croatian coast area, wrecking an Athenian fort and destroying one of the Athenian ships, or on land at the time. At Preparatus, also the sea relented a little, without, however, any inundation following. And an earthquake threw down part of the wall and the city hall and a few other buildings. The causes, in my opinion, of this phenomenon must be sought in the earthquake. At the point where it shook, there had been the most violent. The sea is driven back, and suddenly, recoiling with redoubled force, causes the inundation. In other words, this is tsunami. He's describing a tsunami. Okay? Without the earthquake, I don't see how such an incident could have happened. So Thucydides gives us the account of the tsunami. Inundation could have been the other word, the Greek word. I have to go find what the Greek word is. Here. Um, uh, let's now turn to 390. During the same summer, different operations were carried out by different belligerents in Sicily. by the Sicilians themselves against each other, and by the Athenians and their allies. I shall, however, confine myself to the actions in which the Athenians took part, choosing the most important: the death of the Athenian general Cleodates, killed by the Syracusans in the battle, left Laches in sole command of the fleet, which he now directed in concert with the allies against Mille, a place belonging to the Messians. Two Messenian battalions and the garrison at Melle laid an ambush for the party landing from the ships, but were routed with great slaughter by the Athenians and their allies, who thereupon assaulted the fortifications and compelled them to surrender the Acropolis and march with them upon Messalina. This city afterwards also submitted upon the approach of the Athenians and their allies, and gave hostages and all other securities required. Now, the same summer, the Athenians sent 30 ships round the Peloponnesus under Demosthenes, son of Alcesthenes, no, Alclisthenes, and Proclus, son of Theodorus, and 60 others, with 2,000 hoplites, again against Melos under Nicias, son of Nicocritus. They wished to reduce the Melians, who, though islanders, refused to be subjects to Athens or even join her confederacy. When the devastation of their land failed to make the Messalians submit, the fleet left Melos and sailed to o- o- Orupus in the territory of Graecia, where, landing at nightfall, the hoplites started at once from their ships by land for Terengia in Bottia. There they were met by by the whole levy from Athens, according to their prearranged signal, from under the command of Hippocanus, son of Calais, and Eurymedon, son of Thucles. They encamped, and passing that day, ravaged the Tanagarian territory, remained there for the night. The next day, defeating those Tanagarians who sailed out against them and some Thebans who came up to help the Tanagarians, they took some arms, set up a trophy, and retired. One group to the city and the other to the ships. Nicias, with 60 ships, coasted along the shore and ravaged the Locrian seaboard and returned home. About this time, the Spartans founded the colony of Heraclea in Trachis, their object being the following. The Malayans are divided into three tribes: the Paralians, the Paralalians, the Hierarians, and the Trachinians. Okay, this is sorry, pronunciation is my throat. It's the last of these, having suffered severely in the war with their neighbors, the Oeotians, at first intended to give themselves to Athens, but afterwards, uh, fearing not to be, fearing not to find in her security what they sought, sent Tithesimus, whom they chose as an ambassador to Sparta. The Dorians, from the mother country of the Spartans, also joined this embassy with the same request. As they assembled, they also suffered from the same enemy. After hearing them, the Spartans determined to send out a colony, wishing to assist the Thermacians and the Dorians, and also because they thought that the proposed city would be effectively located for the purposes of the war against Athens. A fleet might be made ready there against Euboea, with the advantage of source passage to the island. And the city would also be useful as a station on the road to Thrace. In short, everything made Sparta eager to found this place. After first consulting the god of Delphi and receiving favorable answer, they sent off the colonists, Spartans, and the Pericotoi, inviting also any of the rest of the Hellenists who might wish to accompany them, except Ionians, Achaeans, and other peoples. Um, three Spartans leading as founders of the colony, Leon, Eclides, and Demagon. They established and fortified the city now called Heraclea on the new site, about 4 miles away and half from Thermopylae, and 2 miles and a quarter from the sea, and commenced building docks. Closed the side towards Thermopylae, just by the pass itself, in order that they might be easily defended. This is now 93. The foundation of the city eventually meant to annoy Ubia, the passage across Caravan in that island being a short one. At first caused some alarm at Athens, but in fact the city never caused any trouble. The reason for this was followed. The Thessalians, who were sovereign in those parts and whose territory was menaced by the foundation, were afraid that it might prove a very powerful neighbor. So they harassed it and made war upon the new settlers continually until they at first wore them out in spite of their original considerable numbers. People had flocked there from all quarters, believing that any place founded by the Spartans was sure to prosper. On the other hand, the Spartans themselves, in the person of their governor, did not did their full share towards ruining its prosperity and reducing its population, as they frightened away the greater parts of the inhabitants by governing harshly and in some cases not fairly, and thus made it easier for their neighbors to prevail against them. So, in other words, he's saying the Athenians thought this colony of Heraclea was going to be a big threat because it was just perfectly on the road. In other words, strategically, this colony looked dangerous. But the problem was the neighbors, the Thessalians, were feared by it. They feared that this would become perspective, and therefore they continually harassed them. And the other thing was, well, even though that it looked like, given the size of the colony, they should have succeeded, but the way the Spartans governed alienated most of the colonists, and they lost them and drove them away. So, in many ways, the Spartans led to disaster. Everyone thought it would prosper, but the way the Spartan governors behaved ultimately undid the reality, and ruined their prosperity and reduced their population, as it says up here. So now let's look at chapter 94. The same summer, about the same time that the Athenians were detained at Melos, their fellow citizens in 30 ships cruising around the Peloponnesus, after cutting off some guards in an ambush at Ilumenos in the territory of Lurea, Leucas. Some subsequently went against Leucas itself with a large armament, having been reinforced by the whole levy of the Archimedeans, except Oronima, and by Zarcathians and the Cephallenians, and 15 ships from Croatia. While the Lucedanians witnessed the devastation of their land without and within the isthmus upon which the city of Limasis and the temple of Apollo stand, without making any movement on account of their overwhelming numbers of the enemy. The Archidamus urged Demosthenes, the Athenian general, to build a wall so to cut off the city from the continent, a measure which they were convinced would secure its capture and rid them once and for all of this most troublesome enemy. Demosthenes, however, had in the meanwhile been persuaded by the Messalians that if it was a fine opportunity for him, having so large an army assembled, to attack the Etilians, who were not only enemies of the Nepuc- uh, Nepactus, but whose reduction would further make it easy to gain the rest of the part of the mainland region for the Athenian. The Ereteans, though numerous and warlike, dwelt in unwalled villages scattered apart, had nothing but light armor, and might, according to the Messians, be subdued without much difficulty before help could arrive. The plan which they recommended was to attack first, but Ap- Epidaurian next to the Ompalians, and after these the Eurathians. These last are the largest tribes of Eritrea. They speak, as it was said, a language exceedingly difficult to understand, and eat their raw flesh raw. Once these tribes were subdued, the rest would readily come over. To this plan, Demosthenes consented, not only to please the Messalians, but also in the belief that by adding the Erythrians to the other mainland islands, he would be able, without aid of home, to march against the Boeotians by way of Oz- Ozolian Locresus and to Cleitium and Doris, keeping Pausanias on his right until he descended to the Phaeocians, whom he could force to join him if their ancient friendship for Athens did not, as he anticipated, at once persuade them to do so. Once in Phaeocis, he would be up on the frontier of Boeotia. Accordingly, he sailed from Lucria against the wish of the Archimedians, and with his whole armament cruised along the coast to Solimium, where he communicated to them with his intentions. When they refused to agree to his plan because he would not build the wall against Lucria, Demosthenes sailed against the Ereteans with the rest of the forces. The Cephalacians and the Messalians and the Zacharians and 300 Athenian marines from his own ship, the 50 Croatian vessels after having departed. He established his base at Orion and Locris, as the Azalian Locrians were allies of the Athenians and were to meet him with all their forces in the interior. Being neighbors of the Etilians and alarmed in the same way, it was thought that they would be great service upon this expedition, from their acquaintance with localities and the warfare of the inhabitants, the warfare of the inhabitants. After bivouacking his army with the army in the precinct of Nemesis Zeus, in which the poet Hesiod is said to have been killed by people of the country, according to an oracle which had foretold that he should die in Nutnia. Demosthenes set out at daybreak to invade Eretria. On the first day, he took Patadina, the next Creocite, and the third Triconiuma, where he halted and sent back the booty to Umpeleum and Locris, having determined to pursue his conquest as far as the Orphonians, and in the event they're refusing to submit, to return to Nepopactus and make them the object of a second expedition. However, the Ereteans had been aware of his design from the moment of its formation, and as soon as the army invaded their country, had come up in great force with all their tribes, even the most remote, Ophelians, Bomenians, and the Calanians, Calanians, whose territory extended towards the Malian Gulf, uh, um, being among their numbers. In other words, the Eritreans figured out his plan, and they organized all the interior tribes to come out and resolve the issue. So let us now turn to the next chapter, which is um, 97. The Messalians, adhering to their original advice, assured Demosthenes that the Eritreans were an easy conquest. They urged him to push on rapidly as possible to try to take the village as fast as he can, as he came up upon them, without waiting until the whole country, nation, people, the ethnoi, I think he said, would be armed against him. Led by his advisors and trusting in his fortune, he had met with no opposition, and without waiting for the location's reinforcements, who were to have supplied him with light armed darters, in which he was most efficient, he advanced and stormed at Jidam, whose inhabitants fled before him and posted themselves upon the hills above the city, which stood on the high ground about 9 miles from the sea. Meanwhile, the Ereteans had gathered to the rescue and had now attacked the Athenians and their allies, running down from the hill on every side, jarring with javelins, falling back when the Athenian army advanced, and coming on when it retired. And for a long while, the battle was of this character: alteration of advance and retreat, in which both were in which operations of the Athenians had the worst. Still, as long as their archers had arrows left and were remained to use them, they held out. The lightly armed Ereteans retiring before the arrows, but after the captain of the archers had been killed, the men scattered. The soldiers, worn out with the constant repetition of the same extortion, and hard pressed by the Athenians with their javelin, had at last turned and fled, falling into pathless gullies and places where they were unacquainted with, and thus perished. The Messian Clerium, their guide, having also unfortunately been killed. A great many were overtaken in the pursuit by the swift-footed and lightly armed Ereteans, but fell beneath their javelins. And a great number, however, missed their road, and rushed into the woods, which had no way out, and which soon ignited and burnt round them by the enemy. Indeed, the Athenian army fell victim to deaths in many forms, and suffered all the vicissitudes of flight. The survivors escaped with difficulty to the sea, and Oenarches and Locris, where they had set out. Many of the allies were killed, and 120 Athenian hoplites, not a man less, and all all in prime of their life. In other words, 120 Athenian hoplites were killed. Okay? These were by far the best men in the city of Athens that fell during this war. Among the slain was Protocles, the colleagues of Demosthenes. Meanwhile, the Athenians took up their dead under the truce of the Ereteans, and retired to Nippacus. From thence went in their ships to Athens, Demosthenes staying behind in Nippacus, and and in the neighborhood, being afraid to face the Athenians after the disaster, because he figured that if he went back to Athens, he would be tried by the city. About the same time, the Athenians on the coast of Sicily sailed to Locris, and in a decent and in a descent which they made from their ships, defeated the Locratians, who came against them and took the fort on the river of Helix. That's the Sicily, case of Sicily. At the same time, the Ereteans, who before the Athenian expedition had set out embassy to Corinth and Sparta, composed of Tolophissus and Orphelion, uh, Borykes, Eurathians, and Tisander and Epidene, persuaded them that an army should be sent to join them in the attack on Nepocatus, which had prompted the Athenian invasion. Accordingly, towards autumn, the Spartans sent out, under the command of the Spartite uh, Eurytholus, Culus, Eurylicolus, Macarion, and Mendaeus, three men. So it's the Spartite, this guy, and this guy. A force of 3,000 hoplites of the allies, and 500 from whom came from the recently founded city of Heraclida in Teractus. Um, the army having assembled at Delphi, Euroclus sent a herald to the Osirian Locrians as the road to Nepatus ran through their territory. And he had also conceived the idea of detaching them from Athens. His chief arbiter in Locrisus was the Anaphesians, okay, Amphicians, who were alarmed by the hostilities of the Phoenicians. These first gave hostage themselves and induced the rest to do the same for fear of the invading army. First, their neighbors and their Meotians, who held the most difficult of the passes, and after them the Empyreans, the Messapians, the Titacians, the Claridians, the Theophilians, the Hessian, not the German Hessian, but the Hessians, and the Orantians, all of whom joined the expedition. And the Opipilians contenting themselves with giving hostages without accompanying the invasion, and the Hypocarians refusing to do either until the capture of Polis, one of their villages. His preparation completed, Euraculos lodged the hostages in Scythium and Doris, and advanced upon Lupactus through the country of the Locrians, taking upon his way Orion and Umpalium, two of their cities that refused to join him. Having arrived in the Nepuctian territory, and having now been joined by the Ereteans, the army laid waste to the land and took the suburb of the city, which was unfortified. After this, Molycilium, also a Corinthian colony subject to Athens. Meanwhile, the Athenian Demosthenes, who, since the affair in Erectia, had remained in Nicaea, having the intelligence of the army approaching, and fearing for the city, went and persuaded the Anakians, though not without difficulty because of his departure from Lucutia, to go to the relief of Nepatus. They accordingly sent with him on board a ship 1,000 hoplites, and who threw themselves into the place and saved it. The extent of its walls and the small number of the defenders otherwise placing it in great danger. Meanwhile, Eulochus and his companions, finding that this force had entered and that it was impossible to storm the city, withdrew not to the Peloponnesus, but to the country once called Aeolus, now Calydon and Plantion, and to the places that neighbored in Procinium and Eretia, because the Ambricists had come and urged them to combine with them attacking Amphilioke Agos and the rest of the Philocria and Arcanians, affirming that the conquest of these countries would bring all the continent into alliance with Sparta. To this, Heraclitus consented and dismissed the Eretlians. Now remain quiet. Now remain quiet with his army in those parts until the time should come for the Ambraciates to take the field, and for him to join them before Argos. And this ends that chapter 102. This is where now, and we're going to end here. This is and we go to the winter. Yeah, this is winter begins in this. So this ends the summer of the sixth year. If you have any questions, please put them below. If you like what you said here, like it, share with a friend. If you want to subscribe, please again, you can follow me below on social media. And, and there's other ways you can help and subscribe star if you want to do this. So I'm going to end up now saying goodbye for now and have a good day.